Hey, everybody. I am so excited to get to share with you today a new friend to me, my friend Ryan Dunn. We've been talking in the Fresh Expressions world about how the pandemic has really been quite the accelerator to a lot of things that were already happening in the world. And one of them certainly is in the digital space. So before we start to dig into that conversation, I would love for you, Ryan, to just introduce yourself to everybody the way you like to be introduced and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Ryan Dunn. I'm a deacon in the United Methodist Church. I currently serve primarily at United Methodist Communications. My role there is as the Minister of Online Engagement. And what that really means is that I serve as kind of like a point of invitation and connection for what we call spiritual seekers. So people who are interested in topics of faith and maybe interested in learning more, but aren't quite dialed into a specific community of faith. So my hope is that I can begin to build a relationship with somebody and help them plug into a local expression of a faith community. Besides that, I serve at a local church. I do all the social media stuff for them for Glencliff United Methodist Church here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. And what else can I tell you? I'm married to Gina, father of Braden, and we live in Nashville.
Nash Vegas. That's where all the things are happening. Yes. So I know that you're not new to this. I call you an early adopter. You were like way ahead of the curve as far as all of this is concerned. So share a little bit about, the beginnings of your entry into the digital space and kind of how that's changed over the pandemic era that we're living in.
Yeah, well, what surprised me when I first started doing this kind of work is how many people were actually engaged in that. It's thrilling to be called an early adopter, but I feel like there were so many people who were engaged this work long before I was. I think it's just that their work has been for specific populations of people. And maybe what's so different now is that we've all kind of awoken to the need that we have for really all of our faith communities to be engaged in some kind of digital ministry. So my work began when I had long been kind of fascinated with fresh expressions of church, familiar with the fresh expressions movement, and loved reading about some of the ways that was popping up in ideas like, kayak church and over in Boone, the Boone Street Saloon, and and expressions like that. So I was looking for ways of living into that in my calling as a deacon, which is to bring the church into the world. So how do we continue to usher the church out into the community to meet new people? And I just happened along this job advertisement for this Minister of Online Engagement for United Methodist Communications. Wasn't even looking for a new job at the time, but I thought, oh man, that sounds so exciting. So I applied for it, and I had a background in both youth ministry, but even prior to that in online marketing and communication. Okay. And so it just gelled up very well, where the skill set that I was able to build kind of in my pre-ministerial life was finally being drawn into my ministerial life in a way that felt like I was able now to be able to bring the church out into new populations of people, to meet people where they are through the digital means.
So you're kind of like the Moses of the digital space, right? I mean, it's funny how the Spirit just puts those things together with the life that we've been living, and then the opportunity, the opportune time.
Yeah, right. So often you think when you make changes like that, it's like, okay, I'm done with that part of my life, and now I'm moving on to this part of my life. But God is at work in redeeming all things, right? So we're never able to quite put that full former self aside. There's still ways to use it as we move forward in life.
So a curiosity question before we get really in the weeds on digital space and digital church. That's the topic of our conversation. But what has changed, or what else was accelerated maybe for your use in during the pandemic that you hadn't anticipated? For me, I'll go first. Like, I will never shop in a grocery store again.
Yeah. Okay. It's all delivery all the time.
Online grocery
Yeah.
shopping, like sign me up. I can sit, on my couch with my phone and get my groceries and have them delivered to my door. What
Yeah.
about you?
For me, I think it's the opening up of things that we can do online that I assumed were just kind of like in-person practices, like visiting a doctor. I
Yeah.
thought, oh, of course, I've got to be in the room with that person. But there's a lot that we can accomplish through a virtual doctor's visit. Not everything, right? But
Right.
there's still a lot that we can do there, or therapy sessions, or even like working with a personal trainer. A lot of us now have experience working with a personal trainer online. That's not something that we really envisioned doing before the pandemic, at least for most of us. So there's kind of this blurring of what we thought was embodied in person practices, and now
Mhm.
things that we're able to do in a digital expression.
hmm And I think, and I think that's pushed the limits of our, it's pushed the limits of our understanding as far as what it takes for something like that, right? For
Hmm.
sure. And our friend Michael Beck always talks about the digital natives versus the digital immigrants, right?
Yeah.
And the generation that's coming up right now, this is all they've ever known, and so it's very real to them. Although we might think of it, so much to a degree of a disembodied, right, practice or belief or community, but there is a real virtuality rather than a virtual reality to what is happening in the
Mm.
digital space. So pastoring in the digital age doesn't look like peeking in the window of a church on Sunday morning, right? Although some people have done that. So say a
Mhm.
little bit about that.
Yeah, there is some of that, and it's important to note that as church leaders, that we offer people the opportunity to do that, to kind of
Right.
fishbowl our faith community as it is. But I think what a lot of us have awakened to during this time of revealing that COVID has brought to
hmm
us is that online ministry can not just be a form of kind of broadcast ministry where it's like we, the faith community, have the voice and we send that out to everybody else, but it is a form of relationship building now where people have the opportunity to speak back with us. And so there's this really kind of awakening to this need that we have to use this, not just in terms of broadcasting and letting people see who we are, but also letting people know that we're here to conversate with them, to relate to them, to begin to share life together. And the digital means opens that up in so many ways, that a lot of us who are, as you put it, digital immigrants, which I would
hmm
probably have to include myself in that demographic, are awakening to now. Whereas the digital first culture, like my son is definitely a digital native,
Right.
that's intrinsic to him, right?
Right.
All of his all of his relationships, especially in this space and time, are facilitated through the digital world with kind of accents of in-person visits,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
that's different for a lot of us. But I think now we're starting to see that I have the opportunity to relate to my friends on a daily basis through the social media world, whereas if I were just to rely on that in-person incarnated presence of my embodied self with them, let's face it, we'd be talking like every few months. So
Yeah,
it's
no,
so
I
different.
think that there's something significant to what you said, and that's the difference between broadcast, right?
Mm.
Which I think was what everybody felt like they were really pushed to do immediately,
Yeah.
right? When the pandemic struck and when we couldn't meet in person. But since then, I think some things have changed and developed and been rounded out to significantly as to what that looks like. And it looks different for every church community. But I think many people had a common experience in that they found out their reach was a lot farther than they had, even imagined before when they had people joining them from other countries,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? It just opened up this space, or other states or whatever. It really, in the words of John Wesley, made the world our parish in a whole new way.
Yeah.
But I think also at the same time, we then had to really grapple with what does it look like to build relationships. And that's where that relational quality, I think, has become more and more significant in the digital space, and those sermonic conversations, if you will, rather than just a delivery of a message and inviting people to participate.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing that now we see this in even in an online streamed worship service, that people are a lot more prone to conversate there than
Yes.
we would be if we were in a sanctuary, right? So for those of us from a certain faith tradition, like our reaction in a sanctuary space might be to vigorously nod our heads, right? Or
Yes.
smile as loudly as we can to just let the pastor know that we're agreeing with her. But now we have the opportunity within digital space where we can ask questions and actually have conversations around that in real time. I mean, this is a tremendous opportunity that we have to be able to not just interact and build relationship with people, but also to kind of instruct people in real time, or to do some public theology in an open space. I mean, it's really, really revealing to see those conversations happening and to encourage them to happen.
That's good. I think it, to some degree, it has filled the digital pews, if you will, with even more people potentially. At the same time, while we've grown bigger, we've grown smaller, in that we have the ability to form relationships in a way with the people that are a part of that we hadn't even considered before.
Yeah.
Because of that exchange that's able to take place there. In that space. What are some of the most creative things that you've encountered? I mean, you have a whole podcast called Pastoring in the Digital Age. That's how I happened upon you and found you. But what are some of the more creative things or effective ways that you've seen in engaging people in this kind of a space?
I've kind of stumbled into this whole kind of subculture of gamer church. So folks who are using video gamed themed platforms to meet people and then form faith community around that. So there are a number of people who their primary parish, so to speak, would be a gaming platform like Twitch. And their mission as ministers is to get onto Twitch and to play games. And a lot of times this is a space where then they are able to meet people and interact with them. So within the Fresh Expressions movement, I know that you're well aware of trying to take advantage of kind of third spaces where people congregate. Well, they found this creative way to inhabit a third space where people are congregating online to play video games together. And then just by being a presence there and kind of incarnating the word in space through who they are, they're able to open up some relationships. And then that turns into something deeper, whether they're inviting them then to a streamed worship service or a space in which they can have, I guess, more directed conversations about spiritual practices. Then they're able to do that. So a couple of practitioners I think about are within the Methodist tradition. Nathan Webb with Checkpoint Church is doing that pretty well. There's a fellow named Jate Earhart who is doing that. There are actually quite a number of people who are doing that.
Yeah, no, and I know Twitch kind of really was kind of almost reinterpreted or transformed during this time, by the potential to kind of build some community when people felt so isolated. And to your point, really Fresh Expressions are formed in places where people are already gathering. So it's not like you're coming out of left field and creating a quote unquote worship service or planting a church per se, but that you're meeting people where they are already. They're already engaged in doing that. It's, you would not find me in a gaming, church. You wouldn't find me in Twitch, because that's just not something I do or that I'm passionate about. But you might find me, doing I started a Facebook group for people that love charcuterie boards. I have 200 people from all over the country in there, and when we get in there and share things. So you find the places where people are already gathering where their affinities lie, and you, like you said, you're faithfully present there. And then as a result of that, you have opportunities to opt in to these different deeper practices or conversations or whatever.
Yeah. One of the things that I did early in the pandemic was I joined a bunch of Facebook groups all around things that I was interested in. Right. So it might be like fitness for dads and fantasy football and digital ministry. And, wherever I could kind of drop in. And I did so with the idea that not that I was going to try to hijack the conversation for my my platform and get people to join me there, but just that I might be able to have something to offer in these platforms and get to know some people. And I think that as Christians, like, we can entertain a calling to do that just about anywhere, right?
Yes.
Certainly Fresh Expressions, one of the reasons why I love your movement is that it's all about that kind of being Christians within the spaces where we live.
All day, every day, right? Not for just about an hour on one day of the week.
Exactly.
What have you been like your biggest lessons in the last 2 years? Like I like to say that we don't really fail, we just learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for me, it's definitely been rethinking how, as a church communicator, I treat social media. So that I think coming out of the local church, tended to use it as a broadcast platform, as I kind of alluded to before. So, I've got information that I need to get to you. Like, hey, we're going to have our fellowship dinner on Wednesday night. It's going to be spaghetti. You need to know this so that you can come and participate. And for me, the biggest shift then has been to be not how I can utilize these platforms to just throw more and more information out there, but how I can utilize these platforms to actually invite people into conversation. So instead of posting solely about like our upcoming events, a lot of the pivot for me has been to look backwards at some of the things that we've done together and then ask people how this affected them, or even ask people in real time then, like, how do you see the Spirit moving within your day right now? To call open those possibilities to have a transformative conversation or even just an uplifting conversation.
Oh, that's good. And that level of awareness too, I think, because some of us are just trying to get through another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But looking for where God's working and where those invitations are. And that's awesome. If you had to encourage people that are kind of, you could say, playing in the digital space right now, what would be your encouragement to them? As far as the digital space and potentially planting fresh expressions of church.
Yeah, well, it's nothing new to kind of own your own space, to go where you are. So whether you lift it up that you're probably not going to go onto Twitch, and right. there are lots of people who are willing to do that. So not all of us need to feel called to go onto Twitch or Discord or anything like that. I'm not a Twitcher either. I do a lot better in Facebook. So to go ahead and utilize the space which you are already inhabiting. Like, I don't have a great Twitter game, but I'm pretty good at like surfing around in Facebook groups and offering my 2-cent takes on whatever's being posted there. So just feel free to not feel like you have to do all the things, but just to do like the one thing, and to do it well. And to do it well, I think like we can let go some of the presuppositions that we might have that we need to have like high quality all the time. I think in order to do things well, like the first step is just to be consistent. So to show up in a space where you already are consistently.
I know nobody can see me if they're if they're just listening to the podcast, but I'm nodding profusely because that's one of the things that I coach people to do when they're looking to form a fresh expression. Just be consistent. Show up in the same place at the same time. So you see the same people and you start to build relationships, and you hear their stories, and that's that very significant part of the Fresh Expressions journey, is just listening.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a great invitation to even not feel like you need to throw up 3 posts on whatever platform you are a day, but maybe you just need to drop in every day to listen. Like, start there. Get to know the people with whom you'd like to start doing community with.
That's good. Because to your point, when you come in with like this agenda, right? Like, you need to hear this. I need to make sure you know this, then that to some degree can prevent you from hearing the things, or just being present and available in ways that you could be otherwise.
Totally. None of us enjoy it when somebody else hijacks our platform. So we definitely don't want to do that to somebody else. So.
Touche. And just like I wouldn't, while you might not join my charcuterie board Facebook group, and I wouldn't be in Twitch, I wouldn't start a Fresh Expression for people that ride motorcycles, because I don't ride a motorcycle. But to your point, where are you already spending time, and how is the Spirit inviting you to be fully present there? I think is well put. Okay, so if you have, because I look at you as the expert, although you are you're not speaking from on high, right? You're practicing what you're preaching. And I know that you're learning a lot of things along the way. But if you had to have, like, these are the 3 things you should do, and these are the 3 things you should not do, what would those things be?
3 things you should do, 3 things you should not do. Let's see. I'll try to do the not do things first. Think about the things that I tried to avoid on a regular basis. And, I think number 1 is like, one thing that I have to not do is assume that I am the authority, right? Because somebody out there is doing something new, and they're doing it well. And there's so much to learn, especially within this kind of open-aired realm that we're working in right now, which is digital ministry, where there's so much new going on. There's so much creativity being expressed that there is so many things that I have yet to learn. And I find that anytime I feel like I am beginning to be a voice of authority, like if I just wait 20 minutes, then we moved on from my level of knowledge, that somebody else has got something to add that I need to learn. So that's definitely one thing. And then secondly is not to feel too much pressure in trying to live up to everybody else, what everybody else is doing. So, there are people out there with way more resources than most of us have, who have, it seems like, infinitely more time to be in these spaces than most of us have. So I think to just kind of be realistic about trying to do our own thing well, and to let go some of those higher expectations. And that's why I think it's important to just kind of commit to being consistent, as we've already noted. I know lists are supposed to come in 3, but I'm struggling to think of a third thing that to not do. I think maybe the third thing to not do is assume that what we're doing in digital space is just a temporary thing.
That's good.
Increasingly more, our society is moving towards a digitally native, or at least a digital first society, where wherever we are looking to interact with people or do business, like, we are doing so first through digital means. And very few of us are going to go to a doctor without looking up that doctor online first and getting to know what she's about. Or very few of us would even go to a new store and look up. I think about, like, if I were to get into mountain biking, for example, not something that I know very much about. I definitely need to do some research about where to go shopping for a mountain bike, and considerable amount of that research is going to be like, am I going to learn something from the staff about mountain biking? I want to know these stories. So, and that's going to happen more and more, where the digital is like the front porch of all of our ministries. And so we can't assume that things are going to go back to where they were in 2019 or so.
100%.
So, and I guess that also turns into, like, what do people need to keep doing, or what what are the practices that we're going to glom
Mm-hmm.
onto it. It's with that to just continue doing some of the digital stuff. I think it's important that we do always kind of have an open air sense to our faith communities where we make it easy for people to get to know us. I think
Yeah.
that's very important. And when we are consistently putting our stories out there in digital spaces, then we're making it very easy for people to get to know us. And I guess maybe that would be my invitation as people consider, like, where do we need to get involved in digital space? Go to the spaces where it's going to be easiest for the people whom you'd like to be in community with to get to know you. Maybe that's the big part of it there. So like for my little church, Glen Cliff here in Nashville, Tennessee, like our people are not on Twitch, but our
Right.
people are on Facebook. So it's important that we have a consistent presence in the Facebook space because that's where we're connecting with the most people and where they're more likely to open up and share their stories and invite more people to get involved in the work that we're doing.
No, that's good. And I would say, even more so, I've been accused of being old because I live on Facebook, but and I know that there's there's a certain age range, right, that you find on the different platforms. But to the same degree, I think that, the younger generations are also more willing and open to share things on social media than they would, otherwise than we would probably.
Yeah.
And it feels like an invitation to meet people where they are.
Yeah. And I think that maybe that is a good second idea of things that we can start doing to be in digital space is just to kind of be authentic and to risk sharing a little bit about our lives. We, in a lot of times in ministry training, they talk about having healthy boundaries. That's super important. But sometimes we impose those boundaries in saying that, our kind of online presence is our own, and we're going to hold that separately from our ministry. But anybody who is looking at your profile, Heather, or my profile online is already making connections to our ministries. In a sense, they're forming a brand impression of what our ministries are through who we are and the kinds of things that we're up to. And so, a second invitation would be to just be mindful of that you're never going to, as a ministry leader, like in these open air spaces, social spaces, we don't really get to separate from our ministries very much.
That's
so
right,
what we do is a reflection on that, but also then we have the opportunity to share about our ministries through who we are. And so just to be intentional about that, like if you're looking through your profile and you're not talking about your ministry space in any way, then, maybe entertain some ideas of sharing how your ministry impacts the rest of your life or how it uplifts your life as an invitation to people who are engaging with you in that space.
I really thought you were going down a whole other trail there. I really thought.
Trail was that?
Well, no, I really thought I was going to say that'll preach, brother. Not that what you said won't, but I really thought, because because of who we are as ministry leaders, need to, be people of integrity in all the spaces, right? And that our ministry does need to flow through those spaces as well. That we don't need to impose those same things on other people. And I think there's some letters about that in the Bible, but
Yeah, that's very good. I wish I said that, Heather. I'll just add, that too.
Yeah. And that, yeah. Well, is there anything else that you would add to the do or don't do list that's coming to mind, or?
Just try things. I think that would be the third thing. I feel like this has been such an exciting time on the positive lately because in so much of ministry world, we've gotten permission to kind of try things out, to grab onto some creativity without being super afraid about whether they succeed or fail. And I know that a lot of us over this period of time grabbed onto ideas that maybe had utility for something just like 3 months, but have since faded away. And that's okay because it's led us into some other spaces. So, I'm
shaking my head. Yes. Again, like profusely, because I think that's a lot of, some of the tension that we manage and starting Fresh Expressions of Church, are doing those experiments to potentially build relationships and with people that are never going to walk in the doors of our church, is that thinking that whatever we start has to last for eternity.
Yeah. Mhm.
And knowing, as we began our conversation, that God doesn't waste anything, right? That whatever seeds are planted or soil is cultivated for the kingdom of God is going to have eternal implications. We might not see it, but that's part of what God's doing. And then the other part is what we learn along the way, to your point, as we experiment, as we try things, just trying to be faithful, right?
Yeah.
And this disruptive climate that has really, really pushed the limits of innovation. And that is really, really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Really
Yeah,
exciting.
indeed.
So what is the spark of light or the place that you're finding hope right now?
The place I'm finding hope right now, I just touched on it a little bit in this period of innovation that we're
Yeah.
going through. I'm sure that you get to see it all the time through the Fresh Expressions movement in the fresh ways, to borrow a word there, where the church is popping up in unexpected ways. And I feel like that's just kind of been accelerated through this time, that something new is afoot, that the church is, in a sense, reclaiming its mission to not just be an institution that exists for the people within the quote unquote walls of the church, but is really kind of reclaiming an outward mission where we're focused on how we meet people who are not otherwise part of the church.
So good. So good. Yeah. That outward facing posture, I think, is something that has been missing, that we've had to reclaim, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is an exciting time to see that.
And we are changed as a result, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
That's not a bad thing. So what is, if there is a question that I haven't asked you that I should have asked, what is it?
That's a hard one. I don't know what I don't know. So, yeah. Well, how about this? I'll turn it on you. I'll turn it over to you instead, Heather. What kind of cool digital expressions have you seen through the Fresh Expressions movement?
Well, I think that, again, when we think about digital church or even online church, we have certain ideas about what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And if, to your point, we kind of reclaim our identity in this whole kingdom-minded, outward-facing, go make disciples posture, that looks a little bit more first century church. Mm-hmm. It looks not as produced and predictable, maybe even. And it looks a lot more like small communities of people, engaging with one another on a regular basis and exploring what it means to be a follower of Jesus together. I love what our friend Michael Beck did with Living Room Church. I love what my friend Shannon Carafond has done in the digital space with her Holy Mischief movement, because it's got people engaged from all over the place, and really just trying to do things to bless people's lives, including themselves, right? To be that spark of light and joy and hope, in the world that we're called to be. So those are two things that I would really lift up. But I haven't been in the Discord world. I know there's some exciting things happening in that space too for people to connect.
Yes, yeah. It's a good platform for just kind of conversation having that's not always needed to be held in real time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's not the meeting that should have been an email, but it's something else.
Right.
Something else altogether.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I really think it's looking more, first century church in the digital space, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks again to the the gift of the Fresh Expressions movement and meeting people in their everyday lives and their everyday affinities, loves, passions, hurts, hang-ups, whatever the case may be, and finding that place of connection and community.
Yeah. If we do have time, you have brought up the kind of differentiation in passing, the differentiation between digital church and church digital, or online church.
Online church versus church online. Yeah.
And I think that that when you first threw that question out there, it sent me back a little bit, because it's not something I had really considered. And I'm aware of a number of churches right now that are primarily digital expressions. So like Checkpoint Church or Lux Digital Church. I just talked with Mark Lutz a couple days ago, and that's a fully online church. But in their vision, it's funny because none of these churches have a vision to always stay just within the digital space. Like they always plan on having some movement towards the embodied thing. And so I think that, number one, that can assuage some of our fears that, we're giving up being an embodied people together. I don't think anybody actually advocates for that. At least I haven't come across anybody that advocates for that. But also the idea that that when we start to talk about church, like church is something that exists as people and not within a specific space. So, none of us look at a church building and none of us theologically correctly look at a church building and say that's the church, right?
Right.
I mean, we open the doors, there are the people, that's the church. And it's the same way that we can look at kind of the online space, where a church does not exist in digital space. The church exists in the community of people who they are. And sometimes
in the temples, the temples where the Spirit lives, right?
Right. And sometimes those people are connecting primarily through digital ways, but that is not the full embodiment of the church. So
that's good. That's good. We talk a lot about in the movement, we talk about the both andness, right? That we're not arguing for doing away with the inherited church or the institution or the traditional form of church, however you want to name it. But instead we're it's really about doing new forms, being about new forms of church in partnership with the existing forms of church. And both are changed, and there is a mutuality, and there is a sharing and a innovation that happens in both, as there's kind of that cross-pollination between the two, right? Because our inherited church is necessary for our new forms of church to take root to some degree, right? And we want to take all of the best parts of our faith tradition, our heritage, forward into what's new, into this new era that we find ourselves in, and that's really, to some degree, the gift of the digital space and the possibility I think that's been afforded us there. Both and.
Yes. Amen.
Amen. Ryan, it's been so fun to be with you and get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit better. Tell everybody where they can find you online, how to get in touch with you, ask you questions, find out what you're doing.
Sure. Maybe a great way you can check out the podcast. I'll put that little plug in there.
Shameless plug, yes.
Pastoring in the Digital Parish. And I believe we have the website pastoringinthedigitalparish.com. So if you search that, it'll draw you over to that podcast. And with that, an email for me would just be digitalparish@umc.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You know what? I just butchered that email address.
It's umc.com, isn't it?
umcom.org. So let me start again. digitalparish@umcom.org.
There we go. Okay. Well, they'll find you.
Yep.
They'll find you. I know they'll be looking for the podcast. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for what you're doing for the church in the digital spaces and for the church in those physical places as well. And we look forward to getting to continue the conversation about these digital spaces. I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point in the future when everything's changed again.
All right. That would be awesome.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.